32 days into Operation Epic Fury, the President of the United States looked into a camera and told 330 million Americans that the war is almost over. Within the hour of him finishing, Iran launched missile attacks on Israel and Bahrain after having fired missiles at Dubai during the speech itself. That single fact tells you more about the state of this war than the entire 19-minute address. But this morning's Fox News coverage produced something unexpected, an analyst who told the truth. Retired Navy SEAL Mike Sarrelli, brought on to discuss the speech, did what almost no one on American television has done in 5 weeks. He outlined exactly where this war is actually headed.
You're watching Fox and Friends First on this Thursday morning. I'm Carly Shimkus.
And I'm Todd Pyro. First, let's turn it over to Mike Emanuel in D.C. with the latest on Operation Epic Fury. Mike.
Todd, Carly, good morning to you. President Trump signaling to allies and adversaries America's military objectives will likely be complete soon as the United States military continues pounding strategic targets deep inside Iran to further degrade the Iranian regime's ability to project power. U.S. Central Command says more than 12,300 targets have been struck. More than 155 Iranian vessels have been damaged or destroyed. The commander-in-chief speaking to the nation about Operation Epic Fury, live from the White House in primetime.
I can say tonight that we are on track to complete all of America's military objectives shortly, very shortly. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. We are in this military operation so powerful, so brilliant against one of the most powerful countries for 32 days. And the country has been eviscerated and essentially is really no longer a threat. They were the bully of the Middle East, but they're the bully no longer. This is a true investment in your children and your grandchildren's future.
The president also signaling he could end U.S. military operations without reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a critical shipping lane.
The United States imports almost no oil through the Hormuz Strait and won't be taking any in the future. We don't need it. We haven't needed it, and we don't need it. The countries of the world that do receive oil through the Hormuz Strait must take care of that passage. They must cherish it. We will be helpful, but they should take the lead in protecting the oil that they so desperately depend on.
The president says Iran wants a ceasefire, eager to stop the pounding from the U.S. military. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry saying, quote, "We will not tolerate this vicious cycle of war, negotiation, ceasefire, and then repeating the same pattern. This is an unjust war that has been imposed on the Iranian people. We have no choice but to fight back strongly." Meanwhile, central Israel was hit by one of Iran's largest missile barrages in weeks as Israelis were celebrating Passover. There was some damage to buildings that were hit. Todd, Carly?
All right, Mike Emanuel live for us in Washington. Mike, thank you. Great to see you.
You bet.
Let's bring in retired Navy SEAL and host of the Everyday Warrior podcast, Mike Sarrelli. Mike, great to see you as well. Thanks for joining us. Another important part of President Trump's speech last night was when he forecast what will happen after that 2 to 3 week time frame if Iran does not make a deal. Listen.
If during this period of time no deal is made, we have our eyes on key targets. If there is no deal, we are going to hit each and every one of their electric generating plants very hard and probably simultaneously. We have not hit their oil, even though that's the easiest target of all, because it would not give them even a small chance of survival or rebuilding. But we could hit it, and it would be gone, and there's not a thing they could do about it.
So the president laying out the consequences there in no uncertain terms. How does this war close out?
Well, Carly, I found that a very interesting speech last night. It was not a mission accomplished. There's more to do on a self-imposed timeline. And we have to do it very fast. I think you just hit it. The largest omission was the Strait of Hormuz and the future security operations of it, which gives him 3 weeks to conduct diplomacy to figure this out. But here are the 4 things that are going to happen over the next 2 to 3 weeks. 1, thin the herd. They're going to continue to strike the regime leadership. 2, boot to the financial jugular. They're going to either seize or destroy oil infrastructure, turn the lights out. They will hit the energy infrastructure for the people in the regime of Iran. But the fourth is the most important. It is going to be this next wave, a coastal killer, hitting all their offensive capabilities that threaten the Strait of Hormuz. I think ultimately what's going to end up is there will be no formal ceasefire or treaty or agreement whatsoever. And we will find ourselves in security operations for the foreseeable future, like we have since 1949 in the Gulf, doing security operations to secure the Strait of Hormuz, regardless of Trump challenging the allies to step forward.
Mike, it's tough to do security operations with just planes. Read between the lines. Does that mean boots on the ground?
There is a possibility over the next 2 to 3 weeks of limited ground operations, and we've been saying it for weeks. Karg Island is probably the most strategic from their oil infrastructure. However, Keshem, Larak, or Lakar, and Abu Musa or Badr Baras are the most important to the security of the Straits of Hormuz. So if we do go in, it will be limited. And then we will get out, because the biggest risk on those offensive operations is actually not the offense taking it, but the defense of holding it, because we put our troops at risk for one-way drones.
Yeah, and when it does come to the Strait, Mike, the president said the Strait will naturally open up because Iran is going to want to be able to sell oil once this war is over. From a military standpoint, and I hear what you're saying about potentially having to stay there to hold on to the Strait, but do those words signal to you a hands-off approach from a military standpoint and allowing the Strait just to open up once we leave?
I don't think that's a reality, Carly, and here's why. Look at the end of the Gulf War I. For over 10 years, we had to conduct what we call containment and security operations. I believe it was, Northern and Southern Watch that eventually became Desert Fox. I do think we're going to have to maintain a naval presence as well as our aerial assets for containment and security operations of the Strait of Hormuz. That's just the reality we live in.
Mike, did our allies get the message last night that it's their turn to police the Strait of Hormuz? Because, again, it is them, those folks, those nations that actually use the oil that passes through the Strait.
Well, Todd, great question. Here's the promising news that we've heard is that Keir Starmer, Britain, is holding a meeting with NATO allies to discuss the security operations for the Strait of Hormuz. Ultimately, Trump is right. We get 2% of our oil imports from the Strait. Europe and Asia are most at risk. We're seeing a lot of proactive rhetoric coming out of Japan and South Korea. So they'll step forward because the shock of the oil prices is hitting them the hardest. Again, we go back to the reality of the situation. Europe and Asia have to step forward because they are dependent on the oil coming out of the Straits.
And finally, Mike, as we talk about the potential last phase of this war, could be a good time now to talk about the Iranian people and the fact that they were tasked, and I'm sure many of them want to, accomplish the mission of rising up and accomplishing regime change themselves. Are the Iranian people still a factor here?
They are. Carly, this is what I would say is President Trump has set the conditions. It may be weeks, it may be months, it may be years before we see a regime change. But he set the conditions by decapitating the leadership, degrading their military capability. What we were not successful at, and it's a very hard task, was eliminating their internal security apparatus. But if we hit the energy infrastructure, I'm talking about the grid, and we continue to degrade the regime's capability, we may see that uprising. We're just not going to see it in the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, and the Israel and U.S. have already hit over 12,000 targets, sunk more than 155 vessels, of course, killed senior leaders like the Ayatollah Khamenei. So we will see what the next 2 to 3 weeks brings. Mike Sarrelli, thank you so much for joining us once again. We appreciate it.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.
Without the flag waving, and his assessment was sobering. Sarrelli said 4 things that cut through every layer of spin. First, he said the speech was not a mission accomplished, a loaded phrase that deliberately invoked the most infamous premature victory declaration in American military history, George W. Bush's 2003 aircraft carrier moment. That comparison alone is worth more than an hour of panel discussion. Second, he said the largest omission was the Strait of Hormuz and future security operations, and that Trump now has 3 weeks to figure that out. This is the central unsolved problem of the entire war. Oil tanker traffic through the Strait remains at a near standstill. No tankers transited the Strait on Tuesday. The IRGC maintains it is fully under their control. Third, and this is the critical point, Sarrelli predicted there will be no formal ceasefire or treaty or agreement whatsoever, and that the U.S. will find itself conducting ongoing security operations in the Gulf for the foreseeable future, comparing it to the decade-long containment operations after the first Gulf War. He named specific islands, Larak, Abu Musa, as more strategically important than Karg for strait security, and warned that the biggest risk is not the offense taking it, but the defense holding it, because of drone vulnerability. Fourth, he said regime change through an Iranian popular uprising may take weeks, months, years, and that the internal security apparatus, the tool the regime uses to crush dissent, has not been eliminated. This is the most honest 5 minutes of military analysis I have heard on any American network since February 28th. The transcript quotes an Iranian military spokesperson. The full verified quote delivered by Lieutenant Colonel Ebrahim Zolfagari was even more pointed. The centers you think you have targeted are insignificant, and our strategic military productions take place in locations of which you have no knowledge and will never reach. Is this bluster? Partially. Iran's navy is destroyed. Its air force is gone. Hundreds of commanders are dead. But the claim is not entirely hollow. A U.S. official told NPR that the U.S. has only been able to confirm the elimination of around 1/3 of Iran's missile capabilities. NPR Iran continues to fire missiles daily, at Israel, at Gulf states, at commercial vessels. On Passover Eve, cluster munitions wounded children in central Israel. A Kuwaiti oil tanker was hit off Dubai. A Qatar Energy's tanker was struck in Qatari waters. Iran's foreign ministry responded to Trump's speech by saying it will not tolerate this vicious cycle of war, negotiations, and ceasefire, and then repeating the same pattern. A spokesperson for Iran's president denied that any ceasefire had been requested, calling Trump's claims delusions and falsehoods of criminals. Whether or not back-channel messages are being exchanged, and reporting suggests they are through Pakistani intermediaries, the public posture from Tehran is unambiguous. They are not surrendering, they are not negotiating on Washington's terms, and they intend to keep fighting. The segment cited 12,300 targets struck by U.S. Central Command. That is a staggering number, roughly 384 strikes per day for 32 days. It represents one of the most intense sustained bombing campaigns in modern military history. But target numbers are not the same as mission accomplishment. The U.S. struck over 25,000 targets in the first year of the Iraq War. It bombed more than 30,000 targets in the campaign against ISIS. In both cases, the bombing achieved tactical objectives while failing to produce the strategic outcome promised. The rubble created more enemies than it eliminated. Iran is a country of 88 million people spread across 636,000 square miles, larger than France, Germany, and the UK combined. Even as Trump insists objectives are nearing completion, hundreds of special operations forces and thousands of Marines and Army paratroopers are now in the Middle East, giving him additional military options if he chooses to expand the war. The president's claim that the Strait of Hormuz will open on its own once the war ends deserves direct confrontation. Sarrelli didn't buy it. The markets didn't buy it. Oil futures spiked more than 5% after the speech. Ships passing through the strait have been required to make payments to Iran in Chinese yuan or cryptocurrency, according to Bloomberg. Iran approved a bill this week to formally charge vessels for crossing the waterway. Iran has effectively converted the Strait of Hormuz from an international waterway into a toll booth, and no 19-minute speech changes that reality. The UK is hosting a virtual meeting of 35 countries to discuss reopening the strait. British Prime Minister Starmer said a united front of military strength and diplomatic activity is needed to restore stability. This is the post-war framework taking shape, one in which Europe, not America, may end up cleaning up the mess. Exactly as Sarrelli predicted, Trump told the nation that if no deal is reached, we will hit each and every one of their electric generating plants very hard and probably simultaneously. He added that targeting Iran's oil would not give them even a small chance of survival or rebuilding. NBC News noted that experts say striking Iranian energy and civilian infrastructure is a potential war crime. The Geneva Conventions prohibit attacks on objects indispensable to the survival of the civilian population, including drinking water installations and electrical networks that serve civilian needs. Deliberately targeting a nation's entire power grid, serving hospitals, homes, water treatment, and food storage, is not a gray area. It is a direct challenge to the laws of armed conflict. The Fox News segment did not raise this point. No host asked whether destroying every power plant in a country of 88 million people is legal, moral, or strategically wise. No one asked what happens to the civilians who depend on that electricity to survive. No one asked whether such strikes would unite the Iranian population behind the regime rather than against it, as mass civilian suffering has done in nearly every modern conflict. Here is where this war stands on the morning of April 2nd, 2026, stripped of all spin. The bombing campaign has been devastating. Iran's conventional military is largely destroyed. Its leadership has been decapitated. But the country continues to fight. The uranium is still underground. The strait is still closed. Gas is still above $4. NATO is still fractured. Children in Tel Aviv are still running to bomb shelters. Nearly 5,000 people are dead. An American journalist is held hostage. 20,000 seafarers are trapped at sea. Markets tanked after a speech that was supposed to calm them. And Iran answered the president's address with missiles. The retired Navy SEAL on Fox News this morning saw all of this and said what no one else would. This doesn't end with a speech. It ends with a long, messy, expensive security operation in the Gulf that will last years, with no treaty and no surrender. Not 2 to 3 weeks. Years. The Council on Foreign Relations assessed that Trump's speech made little mention of diplomacy and that Iran believes the United States is not serious about diplomacy, according to comments from its foreign ministry spokesperson. If that assessment is correct, if there is no diplomatic off-ramp being seriously pursued, then what remains is exactly what Sarrelli described, a war that doesn't end, it just changes shape, from bombing to containment, from epic fury to indefinite presence, from Stone Age rhetoric to the quiet, unglamorous reality of American warships patrolling a hostile strait for years to come, while the rest of the world figures out how to get its oil. That is the truth of this war on day 33. Whether anyone in Washington is prepared to say it out loud remains the open question.